Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2020 Nebraska Canvas Users event. We're super excited to have you all here as we embark on the virtual side of this event. And I apologize for the difficulties getting in. Hopefully you were able to get in without too much trouble. Let's see here. One second. Okay, so we have a ton of great presenters today. Our first speaker today serves as the VP of K-12 strategy at Instructure, where he works to support educators worldwide. As a former teacher, three-time principal and director of elementary schools at Canyon School District, he has over 20 years of experience in leadership and education. With a passion for data-driven instruction, Trenton embarked on a mission to create a formative assessment tool that would allow teachers to better understand what their students know and don't know. Trenton co-founded Mastery Connect in 2009 and served as the Chief Academic Officer until its acquisition in 2019. During the time, Trenton was instrumental in Mastery Connect becoming the leading education software solution for mastery-based learning and formative assessment. He's an industry thought leader, innovator, and published author with his latest book, Reclaiming the Classroom, that focuses on empowering teachers and administrators. Trenton also holds a Master's of Education in Instructional Technology with an emphasis in school administration. So without further ado, Trenton Goble.
Oh, Jordan, thank you so much. It is great to be here with you and with everybody else. I'm going to share my screen. And I always hate sharing my screen because everybody always says, how come you have so many tabs open? Because I can't find anything otherwise. So it is great to really have the opportunity to talk to everyone today. A couple of things as we get started. If you have any questions or things as we go and you want to put them in the chat, we can spend some time at the end to answer questions. And Jordan, if anything comes up that you want to interrupt me and just say, hey, you know, somebody had a question on this and you think it's relevant and pertinent at the time, please don't hesitate to interrupt me.
Okay.
So as Jordan mentioned, I'm a former classroom teacher, a longtime principal and district administrator, and then also co-founder of Mastery Connect. And currently I'm the vice president of K-12 product strategy. And I want to take a second and just talk about a little bit about that first. You know, I started out as an elementary school teacher here in Salt Lake City, which is where I live now and where Instructure is located. And I always thought I was going to be an educator for the, you know, from beginning to end. That's what I planned on doing. I loved doing it. I loved my time as a middle school assistant principal. I love my time even more as an elementary school principal, where I was a principal of 3 different elementary schools. The first school I was principal of was a magnet school for the gifted. When I got there, it was just before No Child Left Behind was enacted. So during my tenure there, No Child Left Behind was enacted, and we started really getting focused on assessment, accountability, AYP, for those of you who remember those things. And I never thought a lot about it because we were the highest performing school in the entire state of Utah, in large part because we were a magnet school for the gifted. And in order to get into the gifted program, you had to test in. So all of our kids were proven test takers. So at the end of the year, when they had to take another test, it wasn't really much of a surprise that we were the highest performing school. So I didn't think a lot about No Child Left Behind until I went to my second school, which was a highly impacted, more urban Title I school. And it was that when I got there, that school had already been labeled a failing school. And I made a lot of assumptions about that school based on just their test scores. I assumed that, you know, the teachers needed a lot of help and that my role as a principal was to go in there and fix everything. And as I got there, I realized a few things fairly early on. One, I realized that the teachers there were working harder than any school I'd ever worked in, that our kids were absolutely amazing, and that we had so many challenges that didn't show up in test scores. We served all of the children in our district, and it was a fairly large district, about almost 80,000 kids. So all of the children with autism in the district, severe forms of autism, came to our school, in addition to our neighborhood's population that was very diverse and very transient. We had a homeless shelter right in our school boundaries. And so every day when I'd walk into school, there would be um, social workers there checking kids in and checking kids out. And so we had a really transient population, in addition to dealing with the challenges of having um, a large number of our students who were learning English as a second language. And so as I got involved in really better understanding our community needs, I realized that, a single test score was not a good way to define success or failure in our school. And so we became very data driven, very focused on more formative assessment measures in terms of being able to identify where students were at. And we slowly started to see growth and progress in our school. But what I learned in that school more than anything else, as much as we became very data driven, it led me to go and start Mastery Connect, which is now part of the Instructure family. I'm very focused on formative assessment. But beyond all of that, it made me realize how important relationships were, and the types of relationships that were being built in that community by our teachers. Our teachers were there early, not because they were trying to plan and get ahead, but because they knew that the doors needed to be open early, because kids were being dropped off by parents who desperately needed to get to work early in the morning, and they needed a safe place for their kids. We had an after-school program in our building that was basically run through the Boys and Girls Club and facilitated through employees in our building, because they wanted to see that program there and available. And so I bring all of that up because this has been an interesting time over the last several months. We have seen a real need to try to figure out how to maintain relationships with our students, at the same time dealing with the challenges. And so one of the things that I found this on Twitter. I like to get on Twitter. I like to see what people are saying. And all summer long, it's been interesting to see teachers and feel that stress and anxiety that exists right now. But I thought this was interesting. If you'll notice the dates on these tweets, this is a teacher who was just kind of getting started in the remote learning environment, and initially was feeling some frustration, and then sent out this letter to her parents, saying, send me your thoughts. Let's connect in that same way that I was talking about before, that trying to build that connectivity with our students. And so it has a very positive feel to it. And I don't know Jessica, but I think it's great that she was reaching out to her parents, and she was getting feedback, and she was feeling motivated. And then a few days later, I noticed that she had tweeted again, and how quickly, that feeling of being overwhelmed in the spring started to show up. And I put this in here because I think it is representative of how a lot of teachers were feeling. Initially, as we were going out, everybody's trying to make the best of a really tough situation. And then reality hits in the challenges of trying to work from home. Those of you who have children at home know how tough that was, or you're trying to balance all of those other things, or just trying to connect with our students. And what I thought was interesting was how many text messages that just followed right along with, I'm feeling the same thing. And so where I feel like we're at in a lot of ways is people are feeling stressed and they're feeling anxious. And the reason why I put people and not teachers is because everyone's feeling stressed and anxious. State administrators, district administrators are feeling really, really stressed over, what is it going to look like in the fall? This is the first time in my career that I think it's the first time in everyone's career that we have this level of uncertainty going into the fall. We all have a pretty good idea probably at this point of how we think we're going to start, but we're not exactly sure how we're going to, how that's going to go. And we're not sure how we're going to finish. And so that stress is felt universally. And I think as it filters down, I think it's always important to remember at the end of the day that the people that are most impacted by this are teachers in the classrooms and our students. And it's one of those things that as we think about if we have to be in a remote learning situation or a blended model, or even in a face-to-face with the ability to have that flexibility to transition to a blended or a remote model, there are some things that we can do to help alleviate the stress and anxiety that people are feeling. So as this is the Canvas User Conference, I came to Canvas just over a year ago. I've been familiar with Canvas from the very beginning. Being from Utah and having Canvas be a Utah-based company, I started Mastery Connect at the same time that Canvas was starting, almost the same year, and we were working side by side for the duration, and we've been a partner with Canvas for many, many years. But one of the questions that I would ask folks as I came in that I was really curious about is why Canvas? Why an LMS? And it's interesting that I would always get kind of this list of answers. We use it for personalized learning, or we're really trying to focus on blended learning. We've got a one-to-one initiative, and so we felt like having an LMS would be really important for our one-to-one initiative. It's a great way to engage students. And one of the most common things that I would hear from people is they would say, it's a place to put all of our stuff. And, the more I thought about that, the more I was like, it's really difficult, especially if you're a new teacher to Canvas or a new teacher to an LMS, and you're trying to understand why you're using this tool, to have such a broad range of all of the things that it could be. But ultimately, what it's really about is it's about making learning personal for each of our students. It's having this centralized environment where as a student I can log in and have access to my teacher, access to feedback from my teacher, and access to all of the materials and the things that I need in an ordered way that allows me to stay connected to my teachers and other students in my classroom. And it becomes a really powerful tool if we as teachers think about the LMS as not a digital tool to put all of our stuff, or not a digital tool that we use during emergencies, but rather this is a centralized resource for us as teachers to be able to connect with our students on an ongoing basis to make learning personal. And when I think about this, I think about when I first started out as a teacher. It seems like yesterday, and feels like yesterday, but every time I look in the mirror, I'm reminded that it was quite a while ago that I started out in this profession. And one of the questions I used to get asked when I was a really young 22-year-old teacher, 23-year-old teacher, 24-year-old teacher, was I would have parents always ask me, do you have kids? And for some strange reason, when they would ask me that, I would take almost offense to the question, because what I implied that they meant was that if I didn't have kids, that I didn't know anything about educating kids. And in my mind, I would always think, I went to college for way too many years to be an educator. And I've worked really hard, and I'm a professional, and the idea that you would question me is somewhat offensive. But over the years, I started to, as I grew up a little bit, and I had my own children, what I realized parents were asking when they would ask me whether or not I have kids is they were really saying that I just need to know that how much I worry about my child. And it becomes really important when we think about how do we make learning personal for all of our students? How do we make learning personal in a remote environment or a blended model, or even a face-to-face model? I think it's always really important to remember that these are individual kids. And the amount of stress and anxiety and everything else that parents feel right now around their children's education is heightened more now than it ever has been. And so as we think about making learning personal, I always like to admonish people, to remind people how as a parent, these parents feel, right? They are so worried. They're worried about the safety of their children. They want their kids to feel like they fit in socially and emotionally. They just want their kids to be loved by us. And that becomes a lot more difficult when we are in a remote setting. And so how do we utilize tools like Canvas to be able to make learning a little bit more personal? So I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about being personal. I'm going to tell you where this comes from for me. I always, I tried my hardest always to be a very thoughtful educator before I had children. And when I had children, I definitely think it made me think, it made me realize a couple things. One, how much I worry about my own kids. But I have two children, a son and a daughter. They're both in college now. And what I learned from having two kids is, dang, they are very different souls. And as a parent, I didn't have as much to do with how they came out as I thought I did. I think if I would have only had one child, I would have just assumed that it was all me. But my son is graduating this semester from the university. And my daughter last year just finished her first year as a freshman. She was scheduled to go back for her sophomore year, and she's deferred for the first semester just because she feels a lot of stress and anxiety. And I'll talk a lot about that as I kind of introduce you to Maggie. So Maggie, when you see this picture, you can make lots of assumptions about her. One, she's a tremendous dresser. I mean, the moon boots and the floppy hat, I think, are really on point. She's also very independent because she actually dressed herself here, and she's at grandma's house. And you would make the assumption that she's very precocious. And when she was young, she was very precocious, and she's very, very bright, very active, but also incredibly sensitive and nervous. Even as a young child, she was very nervous child, and very, very thoughtful. As she went into elementary school, I got to be her principal all throughout her elementary years. And I think that helped her in a lot of ways. For me, it masked a lot of the things that I didn't see because she was in such a safe environment. But as she went into middle school, you can see she looks just like any other middle school child, on her phone. We really started to see this anxiety and fear of school really started to come out. And it was interesting because I can remember when I was a principal, there were many times where I would have a student who was truant or really, not coming to school on a regular basis. And I would talk to parents, and parents would say, I just can't get my child to school. And I would think, wow, what is wrong with you? If it was my kid, I would just, make sure they were at school. And as Maggie went into middle school, there were so many days where I was just like, I don't know how I'm going to get her to school. She just doesn't want to go. It's important to know that Maggie was a good kid, a really good student, a straight A student, liked by her teachers. She was socially well adjusted. But the stress and anxiety that she felt came from the pressures of trying to perform at school. And so that we ended up meeting with the school psychologist and counselor, and she was on a 504. And throughout all of her later elementary, middle school, and high school years, getting her to go to school was a nightmare. It was incredibly difficult. And so as we started really looking at what creates that fear of school, what creates that anxiety, and I start to think about what happened in the spring. with all of our students, having to go from a very comfortable traditional school environment to a remote model, what we started to see was the same fear and anxiety often manifested by parents who were absolutely stressed out about their child's education and whether or not the remote learning setting was meeting their child's needs. But if you were to go on Twitter and see what was stressing parents out, if you were going on Twitter to see like what was stressing teachers out, it was a lot of the same things that on a day in and day out basis were creating a tremendous amount of fear and anxiety for Maggie, and I think for so many of our students. And it's really simple. So as we think about a remote learning environment, as we think about Canvas and our Canvas user groups, and we ask ourselves, how should I think about Canvas? What is this tool for? What are the key elements that I should be thinking about as I'm putting my courses together? And it really comes down to what we call the fundamental 5. What am I supposed to do? So when you don't know or you're uncertain about what you're supposed to do, are you doing the right thing? I mean, is this exactly what teachers expect of me? Can create a lot of stress, right? When you think about something simple, and this was magnified in the spring as our students went remote, the question of when is it due? It sounds so simple. What am I supposed to do? When is it due? If you were in class, you can write it on the board. You can say it out loud. But so often, even if you say it out loud and you write it on the board, if you have a student, there's so many things that go on in a school day that it's very easy to get home and go, I can't remember if this was due today or if it's due tomorrow. And if you're not really sure, that can create a lot of tears and anxiety for students. So that understanding when something is due is a major contributor to the stress and anxiety that students may feel. Got clicked out. So the next one is, how did I do? And you think about the going remote in the spring for our students and for our teachers, that ability to give feedback. And is that feedback timely? Is it immediate? Or is it just one of those things where I turn something in and a few days later, there's a score in the grade book? Or in many cases this spring, we had environments where students were not responsible for turning things in. There were not due dates, that we kind of locked the grading system. And then that becomes a question of have we created a culture where students understand that it's not about a grade, it's about the process of learning. And it's about, taking risks and learning from our mistakes. But being able to provide feedback for our students in a remote setting can be really challenging. And then having an environment where we can communicate with our students, right? Can you help me? Is there a way for me to communicate with individual students, with groups of students? Can students communicate with one another? And is there a way for me to really, truly connect to be able to provide support and help students? And the last one I think is really important. So if you think about the fundamental 5 here and put it all in context, all of this should sound super like matter of fact, like, oh, this is relatively simple. This is not rocket science. And the reality is it is not, right? Making sure that our students have a clear picture of what they're supposed to do. Having a clear understanding, using, say, the calendar inside of Canvas and setting due dates, so that anytime I need to know, I can log in as a student or as a parent and I can see exactly what I'm supposed to do. I know exactly when it's due. When I turn things in using things like SpeedGrader and the grading tools inside of Canvas, that I get that feedback, and that feedback isn't necessarily just a score, but it could be, a video that I record, it could be annotated notes, it could be an audio, it could be all kinds of things that provide my students with feedback. And that ability to communicate and connect with our students inside of Canvas is so important. But that last one, what more can I do, becomes really important, right? Becomes very important in terms of, in a remote environment, are we allowing our students to demonstrate that they understand in a variety of ways, given that not every student will have access to all that they need in order to be able to do that. So as we think through these, I also think it's important that I've added up here, and I normally don't talk about what am I supposed to do for parents and the teachers and administrators. I usually focus on students. But I also think right now we need to be very cognizant of the fact that if I'm a district administrator, a state administrator, there are school building administrators that are saying, you need to help us out. I need to know exactly what I'm supposed to do. Parents are asking the same question. And so as we go through these again, it's really important to think, depending on your role, if I'm a state administrator, a district administrator, who are the people that I'm supporting? And how can I actually make sure that we are addressing these most fundamental questions, the most taxing, the most stressful questions that are coming up for our students, for our parents, for our teachers? I think those are the people that are really feeling it the most. Again, when are things due? Are we able to make that clear? And I want to highlight, I think at the very beginning, I talked about, why an LMS, why Canvas? What is the value? Yes, it's a place that you can put stuff. You can do personalized learning. You can do blended learning. You can do all of those things. But at the end of the day, when we set up our courses, the parameters by which we should be thinking about what should be in our courses, how should our courses be structured, we should start here by utilizing the fundamental 5. What am I supposed to do? When is it due? Taking into consideration all of the different stakeholders. If I'm a teacher, I need to be thinking about, am I able to communicate this clearly to students? Am I communicating this clearly to parents? Am I creating an environment that is consistent so that my students know where to go on a regular basis? They don't have to kind of hunt around and go all over the place. And are we doing things that are creating consistency across our school or across our district, so that if I have a student in a secondary environment, they're not having 7 different experiences with 7 different teachers as they go to school, but there's some consistency in the way we approach the implementation of these strategies. So that becomes really important as you go through and you think about this process. I'm going to pause right there really quick, Jordan. I just want to check and make sure we haven't had any technical difficulties. It seems like we've kind of, I just want to verify that people are still able to hear and we're still good.
Yes, I think we're good. We're getting more folks in now. I think there was an issue with the original link, but we've got a bunch of people in, so I think things are working now.
Okay, great. I just wanted to verify that I wasn't just still here, just
talking to me.
Yeah, exactly. So thank you for that. So as we go through this again, what am I supposed to do? And the reason I'm doing this over and over again, because if I could wish for anything for all of you as you kind of go back and you're thinking about starting school, it would be that you were grounded in at least a philosophical understanding of why this is so important, and being able to take these very simple kind of questions that allow you to center the way you develop your courses, the way you interact with your students online. I think it becomes really helpful. So how did I do? Did I do it right? It's so important that we provide feedback. And I think in the spring, that was one of those areas where we did the absolute best that we could when it came to giving students assignments. More often than not, those assignments were not necessarily being collected or scored or anything else. And that was because we were scrambling. But as we go into the fall, whether you're going to be face-to-face, if that's how you're starting, or you're starting in a blended model, or you're starting remote, we're not going to get away with that again, right? I think there was a lot of latitude that was given to us in the spring, as everybody was feeling the pressures across the board. But going into the fall, that ability for us to be able to collect student work, to be able to provide feedback to students, and then have an environment by which students can connect with us and communicate with us, is going to be a critical part of our success in the fall. And it's going to be the things that make the difference between us struggling in the spring and us finding our groove and really making that school environment an environment that makes learning personal for each of our students. And again, on this, what more can I do? Sometimes when I say what more can I do, people automatically think, students who already get it, do I give them extension opportunities, right? Or do I accelerate students through the process? And really what I mean here is when we are working in a remote environment, we have to be cognizant of the lack of equity of opportunity that exists for our students, and that we have to be mindful of providing ways for students to demonstrate their knowledge and their understanding in a variety of ways. And so all of that kind of wraps up into an environment that really, when you think about Canvas and the LMS and what is the role of the LMS, I think it's really important, and I want to highlight this because I think it's critical, is that having a centralized location that our students can log into at the single login to get access to the materials that they need, to have access to you and all of their teachers, is not something that is limited to a remote setting or to a pandemic. This is good instruction in 2020 to have a singular location for all of our students to help alleviate the stress and anxiety that they feel of having to go to 30, 40 different disparate sources or resources to be able to do their work in school. To be able to bring all of that together in one space becomes really critical. So here's Maggie again at graduation. She made it. And as I talk about her right now, I'm going to say some things in the way that I normally say things, but knowing what you know about Maggie, that she is a high stress, high anxiety kid. School, even though she looks lovely here and obviously she did well in school, it was a battle every day for her to get up and go to school. And so as she graduated from high school, she graduated, she had 1 A- in the 4 years that she was in high school. She was the drama club president. She was engaged in a bunch of extracurricular activities. She took 9 AP classes and took all 9 tests, had 8 5s and 1 4, which, we felt really bad, her poor performance on her 1 AP test. But I joke about that because even as I talk about her and her successes in school, you can see the degree of pressure that she probably felt, because those are things that as a parent I want to really celebrate, that she was an incredible student. She was incredibly diligent and she worked incredibly hard. She got a full ride academic scholarship to the university. She could go just about anywhere that she wanted to. But school was not fun for her. It was highly stressful, that need to be perfect. And even in the way I described her, you can almost sense that we can do this to our kids unknowingly when we sit here and talk about, she's a straight A student. She took 9 AP classes. She was president of the drama club. She had, graduated with honors across the board and was just the most amazing kid. All of that for her was part of what created school being a very stressful, high anxiety experience for her. And I wish as a parent that I could go back and just say that, we loved her and we were there for her and we didn't put that kind of pressure on her. But clearly we did. And some of it is just who she is. It's part of, she's a high achieving, high anxiety kid who grapples and struggles with that on a regular basis. But as I talked to her about, what was the difference? Because there were some classes that she didn't mind going to, and it wasn't just, this is a class that is in a subject area that I'm really interested in or falls into something that I really love. It could have been anything. But the thing that was really important for her was, she said, I felt safe to learn and make mistakes when I knew my teachers cared about me. And if you think about that, the theme of this whole presentation is, how do we make learning personal for all of our students? How do we make learning personal in a remote environment? How do we utilize an LMS like Canvas to help us make learning personal, whether that's face-to-face, blended, or in a remote learning environment. So much of it comes down to finding ways to show our students that we care, that we're actually interested. And if you go back again to the fundamental 5 and you think about what would stress our kids out right now, if you're a parent and you were sitting there with your kids in the spring and you were thinking, man, this could be so much better, this could be so much easier. My guess is that more often than not, the things that stress you out were not being certain about what the expectations are, what we were supposed to do, what was needed. Probably wasn't certain about due dates, or if things were due, or even if in situations where they said, we're not going to have you turn things in, having to deal with students who said, then why am I going to do this? You know, being able to provide feedback to students. For Maggie, this was really important. In so many ways, some of the hardest times for Maggie are the gap between when she turns something in and when she finds out how she did. That the longer the gap, the greater the stress and the strain and the anxiety, because so much of the pressure that she felt was about accumulating points. And when she had teachers that she felt she could make mistakes in their classroom, that it was going to be okay, that there's going to be multiple opportunities if she didn't do well to find her way back to where she wanted to be, that made all the difference in the world. Being able to take away that stress and that anxiety is how we make learning personal for our students. Having the ability and the open door for our students to be able to connect with us becomes really important. And one thing in a remote environment that I'll highlight here, because I don't think it's wise to say, the lights are on 24 hours a day. You can call me anytime, text me anytime, email me anytime. But being able to set office hours and parameters for teachers to be able to connect with you through Canvas and being able to communicate that clearly becomes really important. And then again, being mindful of how important it is for students to be able to communicate with us or be able to communicate their understanding in a variety of ways becomes really important. So as you think through this, what does this look like inside of Canvas? I'll go through this last part fairly quick. But over the summer, some of you may be familiar with the Canvas for Elementary group that started up just this summer. I was impressed when they had like 5,000 people join in the first week or two. I was more impressed when they had like 20,000 in the second week, and now they're over almost 80,000 teachers have signed up in the last 2 or 3 months to take part in this group of teachers on Facebook who come together to talk about how they are utilizing these tools and to support one another. But I think it's really interesting. I find myself gravitating to the people who are the most frustrated, because those are the people that I'm desperate to want to see do better. But here's a couple examples. I just grabbed these off my phone, and I don't know these folks, but I think they speak for lots of people. When they talk about the stress and the strain of trying to get started. So when we talk about making learning personal, we have to think about, if we're administrators and we're expecting our teachers to really make this transition to utilizing an LMS to be able to connect with our students remote or blended or in a face-to-face environment, we've got to be mindful of how important it is that we provide appropriate support for our teachers, because they're feeling the stress and the strain of trying to prepare all summer, getting hit with a million different things, including the uncertainty of what the beginning of school year is going to look like. Here's another one. And I always think it's interesting that I don't know how this works in Facebook. I don't use it. I just kind of troll around in there looking to see what people are saying. But when they take the time to put a nice background and throw on, a bolded font like this, it really highlights, I think, how so many people feel. Lisa here was feeling stress. I could feel it just from her post on Facebook. I believe her. I believe that she is literally in tears, feeling the stress and the strain of trying to get started. So again, when we think about getting started, I think it's a lot easier if we think about these fundamental questions that should drive us as we go through this process. I also think it's really important to keep it simple. So this is just an example of a first grade course that was created by our team here at Instructure. And the reason I like it is it highlights some things that I think matter the most. If you'll notice on the far left-hand side, that the left-hand example is what it looks like on, on a laptop or on, a web version. And the one on the right is the same course, only in the mobile environment. But you'll notice on the one on the left-hand side in that second tier of navigation, there's only 3 things showing up: announcements and modules. So the teacher's limited what a student is actually seeing when they log in to Canvas for the first time. They're being thoughtful about keeping this course simple. If I'm a student, I know I can log in here. I can look at Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. They probably have it set up as modules in behind that. But it's my first experience as a student is very simple. But even more important than that is there's also that communication piece down below where there's a note to parents, right? So I always recommend, as you're setting up your Canvas instances, keep it simple and make sure you have some key things. And I do want to say, Shara Johnson, who is a local educator there in Nebraska, has taught me so much about what it really looks like to make learning personal and accessible inside of Canvas. You have one of the finest resources in the entire planet in your own state who can help facilitate some of these things, but it's really important to keep it simple. Now, it's also important to keep it consistent. If you're a district level administrator and you're thinking about how do we have structure to this so that our student experience is the same every time, so that when I log in, I'm not trying to, as a student, figure out how to navigate this course. And when I go to my next class, I'm trying to figure out how to navigate that course. Using things like blueprints and templates become really, really important in order to try to create that consistency. That said, here's some more examples. I pulled these off the Canvas for Elementary Facebook group, and so there's screenshots off my phone. They're not the greatest, but you can get a sense of, you can have that same structure around the way you set up your course. These are all set up on a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Not saying that's the right way to do it, but if that's how you decide to do it internally, right? But they look a little different. They feel a little different. For those teachers that want to, once they really understand the tool and they want to make learning feel a little more personal for their students, they want this to connect better to the kind of vibe that they would put in their own classroom. I think it's important that we maintain that degree of flexibility. But I would also say, it can get wild out there. And some of you who maybe have kind of followed the Bitmoji homepage craze, it's amazing. It's amazing to see what teachers are creating. These are pages that are using Bitmojis and links where they're linking the graphics within their homepage for students, and they're creating classrooms that look and feel just like their traditional classroom. And it's incredible what teachers are doing. And so as you're looking at some of these things, there's some teachers, it's interesting that as I watched all summer long, as teachers were creating these incredible Bitmoji classrooms, I also saw other teachers who were like, oh no, I am not in any sort of shape to be able to put together something like this. And it's important to understand that this is not something everybody should do. That my recommendation would be, if we're going to make learning personal for students, let's remember the fundamental 5 first. Let's make sure we're addressing those fundamental questions in something that could be very, very simple. If over time you develop skills that you want to do something that's, more personal, great, but don't sacrifice making something look nice for making sure that you have all of your content, all of the materials that are needed, all of the structure in place so that you're ready for school on the first day. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of when I was a teacher. My first year, I spent so much time putting up bulletin boards and making sure my rows were exactly right and getting name tags and all of that other stuff. That when school started, I realized very quickly that I probably should have spent a whole lot less time doing that and a lot more time making sure that I had my curriculum in place. The same thing holds true here. And finally, what it really comes down to is that when we're implementing new technology, it could be anything. But right now, as we are seeing a much wider adoption of Canvas, so many more users who are new to this, it's an incredible system that allows teachers and students to be able to connect in ways that we can make learning very personal for all of our students. That has to be in addition to support. Our teachers need the support to be able to get these systems up and going. They need the support, and not just the technical support, but the emotional support. They're going to feel overwhelmed at times. This is an overwhelming time of year, and I think we probably should have put support there in caps and bold, that this is the time when we have to support one another, because these are very stressful times. But as we do that, those systems in place with the support are what's going to be the difference between success in the fall and not getting there. So that's where I'm going to end it right there, Jordan. Hopefully I didn't go over time, but I would like to say that I appreciate the opportunity to share these thoughts with you today. And from the bottom of my heart, I am pulling for everybody to have a successful start to the school year. And I hope that all things go well, that we're able to get back in our classrooms with our students in a safe way as soon as possible. But I hope that we're there to be able to provide students the support they need, whether that's face-to-face in a blended model or remote. So I wish you all the best.
Great. Thank you, Trenton, for sharing your story and for hope that, things are going to be okay as we move through this uncharted territory. We have just a few minutes. If anyone has any questions for Trenton, is that okay? Okay. Getting lots of love in the chat.
And I will reiterate, and I'm not saying this, I'm not saying this very lightly, but as a state of Nebraska, you have some of the most amazing educators I've ever met, Shara being one of those, who is right there in your own state and is a world-class educator on top of being a world-class educator of Canvas. So I'm really excited for the state of Nebraska, and I'm excited to see the amazing work that's going to come out of there.
Okay, question from Mark. How is Instructure getting ready for a very full coming fall?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, because as you can imagine, we saw an amazing, the transition from in the spring from, our normal volume of users to when people went remote, it just went through the roof. And over the course of the summer, we have seen a large increase in the number of people who are opting to use Canvas starting in the fall. And so we have spent the entire summer making sure that we are in a position to continue to scale and make sure that our system is going to be up and be able to support that volume. It's been our number one priority all summer long. We are, it was very gratifying for us to, in the spring, as things shot up and we started to see the increase in volume of users, that we were able to stay up and not have any issues with that. So, I will just say that this summer has been a busy summer for our team, making sure that we're ready to go in the fall.
Okay, any other questions from anyone for Trenton while we have him here? Kevin asked if you could put your top 5 slide up so you can grab a quick screenshot.
Yeah.
All right, there you are. Okay, if there are no other questions, we can kind of wrap this up. Again, I apologize for the issue with the link. Like I mentioned in the chat, this recording will be available on the website after today. So if you missed anything, please check in back there to view the recording. And the next sessions for the breakouts, they will have different links. So just check the website schedule for that. And then there will be evaluations offered in all of the sessions. So just be sure to fill that out, give us some feedback on how things went so we can make this event better next year. Okay. Any final thoughts or questions before we go? All right. Well, thank you, Trenton. We appreciate having you so much and hearing your story. And we always welcome you back to Nebraska.
Awesome.
Chat and collaborate with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right. I will see all of you in the next sessions. So stay tuned. All right. Thank you, everyone.